Welcome everyone to the 30th scheduled board meeting of the Central AD. If you would all please stand and join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming. Do we have any comments from the audience on non-agenda items? Good. I was going to have to seclude former board members on that. I didn't have to add that in there, so thank you on that. I'm going to go on to corrections to the agenda and consent calendar. And we are going to pull consent item 4D about the secondary clarifier. Not ready for prime time, it'll show up again in the future, I'm sure. So other than that, do you have any corrections to the agenda or consent calendar? Let's keep a motion going.
I'll move that we approve the agenda and the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Changes as
We're changing this to pulling consent item 40. Okay, unanimous. Thank you all. We do have a presentation about the financial audit.
Yeah, Justin Williams, he's a partner with Man, Rudy, and Nelson, the firm that has conducted the district's independent audit the last 3 years. We have a great relationship with this firm, and district staff are very satisfied with the knowledge and professionalism of the audit staff.
Good afternoon. I'm here to present the audit results for the district for the year ended June 30th, 2019. We met before the board meeting with the finance committee on those big over the audit results. As I mentioned, hopefully this isn't too boring for those numbers because I'm going to go over the same presentation now. A little bit about the audit process. I like to remind boards as well as management the financial statements themselves are the responsibility of management. And it's our responsibility as the auditor to come in and form an independent opinion on the financials to let the reader know whether or not the financial statements are materially correct.
I get your show up and running.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's not your fault.
About our audit process, we break our field work down into 2 different phases, interim phase and year-end phase. Our interim phase, we were out here in June. A big part of this phase, we look at internal controls, the processes that you have in place over a variety of different areas. We're looking to make sure that you have appropriate internal controls in place. If not, we make different recommendations on how those can be improved. An example of some of the different areas that we look at, really 4 main areas. We look at the cash receipts process, revenue coming into the district. We look at the cash disbursements or expenses, what are the controls, sign-offs, approvals that are in place over that part. We look at the HR and payroll processes. On the HR side, we look at hirings, making sure the pay rates are properly approved, any terminations. We look at the payroll process itself. To make sure that that's being approved properly. Also look at financial reporting, and that's really how those other areas, especially on an individual day-to-day basis, are accounted for in your accounting system, and then roll up into your financial statements, which we ultimately form our opinion on. Also, if we had any findings from the prior year, we look at those to make sure that those have been implemented during this phase as well. After year end, obviously this is June 30th, once the books are closed and a lot of audit schedules are prepared for us, we come out this time at the end of August to do our testing, our year end portion of the field work. I think this is what most people think of when you think of an audit. It's a testing of the numbers. So we're testing year-end balances as well as the activity throughout the year. A few examples of the different types of tests we do. Cutoff testing, this is a big one. We look at transactions that occurred on both sides of the year-end. So we look at transactions that occurred in July and August of 2019, as well as ones that occurred near June, the June year-end. So that way we make sure that transactions are being recorded in the proper periods. Also do confirmation of balances where we send out third-party confirmations directly to third parties, most commonly financial institutions. We get those back to confirm the balances directly. Do analytical review procedures. Those are comparing balances of different accounts over the years. We look for any unusual variation for things we wouldn't expect. Also do ratio analysis. For example, we'll do different payroll average salaries and compare those over periods. So different ratios we'll look at. If anything shows up that is some sort of anomaly or is not what we expected, we dig in further. Also do detailed transaction testing where we're pulling samples and tracing detailed transactions in your accounting records down to the source documents. Another big part of your audit is the single audit. That's the federal compliance audit. Any organization in the U.S. that receives more than $750,000 in federal funds has to get this additional single audit. And then putting together the financial statements to make sure they're in accordance with all the proper requirements. So reporting the results of the audit. In this case, there are 5 different documents that we issue. Audit opinion, that's the main report we issue. We also issue the government audit standards report and the single audit uniform guidance. Those first 3 are all included in the basic financial statement packet. And then the other 2 are separate letters, communication with those charged with governance, you, and our report to management. So we'll quickly go over the results of each of these. First one, as I mentioned, this is the most important one, really. This is our independent auditor's report. It's our report on your financial statements to let the reader know whether or not they're correct or fairly stated. In this case, we have an unmodified opinion, which is what you want. It's a clean audit opinion, so it tells the reader that the numbers are materially correct. Next report we issue, the government audit standards report. As I mentioned earlier, when we're looking at your internal controls, if we identify anything we consider to be a deficiency, we're required to put that in one of 3 categories under the audit standards. A material weakness is the most severe of a control deficiency. A significant deficiency is a step down. And the third one is a management letter comment, also called a control deficiency. If it's the important part of this report is if we identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, they're required to go in a prescribed format in this report. So those findings would be part of your audited financial statement packet. If we have any recommendations that fall below those levels, we can put them in a separate management letter. We don't have one of those, but I'll get to those in a second. Or to that in a second, but the important thing to know here is we do have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies or compliance exceptions. Definitely good news. Next report, as I mentioned, is the federal single audit report. The major programs, the program we tested this year was the Drinking Water of the State revolving fund, $902,000 in expenditures. We do additional tests to make sure that the expenditures are in compliance with the federal funding, as well as that there are no unallowable costs involved in those. We had no exceptions there and no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies as they relate to federal funds either. One of the separate letters that we issue, the communication to those charged with governance, we call it the SAS 114. It stands for Statement of Auditing Standard number 114. In addition to the audit opinion, there are certain other things we're required to communicate directly to you, and this letter accomplishes those additional items. First part there, if you had any new accounting policies that were implemented, we're required to let you know that. As you can see, there were none this year. Also required to point out any estimates that are in the financials. All financial statements are going to have some sort of estimate, the most common being depreciation. And in this case, there's also the net pension liability as it applies to PERS. And the reason that's an estimate is because that number is derived from an actuarial study, which by its nature is considered to be an estimate. Nothing unusual there, we just require to let you know what those are. If we had any difficulties in performing the audit or disagreements with management, we would let you know here. But examples of those things would be if we had significant delays in the audit, or if we had a hard time getting information in certain areas. Maybe it wouldn't ultimately affect our audit opinion, but if it caused delays or additional costs, this would be where we would let you know that. But as you can see, we have none. Also required to let you know if we had any adjustments. We did have 4 audit adjustments at the end of the year. One was a market value true-up for lathe, FEMA accounts receivable, booking interfund interest, and then a small inventory true-up. And then we also had one past adjustment, which is an adjustment that's a small amount that's not considered material, so we don't report that. That was related to a scheduled compensated absence, not timing items. I mentioned earlier, if we note any deficiencies in your internal controls, if they are the 2 severe ones, the material weakness or significant deficiencies, we put those in that yellow book or government audit standards report. If they are the lowest level of control deficiencies, the management letter comment, if you will, we put that in the separate letter. And that's what we have here. We just had a comment related to the sewer parts and supplies inventory. We go out and get an observation of that count, which is done at the end of the year. And our recommendation was just to improve the overall organization. It was difficult to identify in some instances what parts belong to the district and which parts were owned by contractors. Ultimately, we were really comfortable with that, but it was just a general recommendation to organize that inventory a little bit better. So in conclusion, a summary of what I just went over: unmodified opinion on the financials, no material weaknesses, compliance exceptions, or significant deficiencies. We had the 1 management letter comment and 4 of audit adjustments. So definitely very, very good news. Overall, very good audit results. We select a whole lot of samples, do a lot of testing in the 2 different periods. We're out here, and to ultimately end up with really good audit results like this says a lot about the quality of the staff you have here, particularly in finance with Paul and Debbie and the rest of them. They do a great job, and as evidenced by the audit results here. Any questions?
Kelly and I had our shot at asking questions, so maybe you, Jim, have anything for him?
No, I would just, it's like you said, it's great news. Paul and Steve, just out of curiosity, how do we kind of fit in with other water sewer providers in California? Do a lot of people get clean? I'm just out of curiosity.
Sure.
We talked about other municipalities and stuff, and I'll let Justin answer on this, but by comparison, we're at the top.
Well, that's what I figured about.
So-
Definitely not all my presentations are not something like this.
Well, that's why I don't have any questions. It's like getting a report card with all age. You're like, yeah, job.
And that's been the case for the last several years. Believe me, we try to find things. But they do a great job in preparing accurate financial information for us, and so we don't end up with any major issues. But yes, that's definitely not the case for all of our clients, for sure.
Just a couple of comments I wanted to make. Well, thank you once again, Justin, for a good audit here. I think it went well. I think the mutual respect between district staff and audit staff contribute to these results. But definitely the most important is the fantastic advanced preparation completed by Debbie and her staff and Lynn prior to the auditors even getting here, as well as just the relentless, constant protection of district assets and the day-to-day maintenance of our internal control policies.
And behind closed doors, for those who don't know, we make staff leave so we get the real inside. So once we got behind closed doors, I just want to give you props, Paul, because Justin spoke highly of you, and in my 8 years on this board, I think that you've done a really good job of being very meticulous, very conscientious, and above all, very transparent with everything you do. So we appreciate that. Thank you. go to sewer unit transfers with Mr. Bledsoe. And you are going to get the praise.
So I'm going to talk about a little bit about transferring sewer units and making an exception to do that for public agencies. Just here recently, we were approached by the city. They're doing a lot of developing and upgrading of their buildings, and got some plans in the future for development for like where the rec center is and places like that. And they had approached us, or approached John, and asked, if we could transfer sewer units from parcel to parcel only for city projects. And of course, we said that was something that we would have to bring to you to discuss, because the only thing we have in place right now to transfer sewer units is for low-income housing. And I can tell you, the city currently has about 56 sewer units in excess. A lot of those parcels are vacant, and they've been capped off in the past with no future development in sight to do anything with them. So today we just want to discuss that with you to see, or get feedback from you to see if you're interested in maybe coming back next meeting with a proposal to transfer sewer units from one parcel to another for public agencies, not just the city, but it could also be with the county and other public agencies that might have an interest in doing this.
Just to let you guys know, when Chris and John and I were in a meeting with Council Person Wallace and City Manager Frank Rush, Frank brought this up specifically related to they're going to reopen fire station number 2. And in the meantime, they want to house some, is it EMS people? And they've got a building across from the rec center there. I don't know if you guys know where that city building is. And while they're doing the construction on this new fire station, they want to house these EMS people for a 2-3 year period. And they realized if they put them in there, they're going to incur capital costs with sewer units. And they thought, well, that's kind of, in terms of the whole scope of the project, it's not a lot of money, but it is still public funds, and they would like not to spend money, the public's money, if they don't have to, and particularly seeing how it would be a temporary basis, because we don't really know exactly how many sewer units the new fire station is going to have and all that. But I just thought it was a good idea. Chris thought it was a good idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, you were open to it also.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's where all this came about. And that's kind of where I come in. It's ultimately the residents of the city are ratepayers of us, and it's like we're spending their money even though indirectly. So that's why this is here.
So thank you for the additional information, because inherently I wanted to say yes, but then there's the part of me that, well, why are they special? I mean, just to be brutally honest, why is the government afforded to breaks that the general public is not? That's problematic for me in a lot of different ways. However, I do think, based on what Randy said, the position of others, that it does seem like a good idea. Our opinion, we talked about it at length, the importance of it. So yeah, very, very good.
Yeah.
Would this be extended to other governmental agencies like the county or school
It
district?
would be, yes.
So it's not just the city?
Not just the city, be all public agencies.
Yeah, one comment on that, John and him and I talked about this, we felt that we couldn't treat the city specifically different than others. As a class, we needed to treat really, since the city's a public agency, we needed to treat other public agencies in a similar situation. It's carved out for one public agency. And then we talked about it would be limited to certain that any one public my mind is they are public agencies. They've got revenue that's raised by taxes or other by public funds, and it seemed to be if this is going to be considered to not require them to spend those public funds unnecessarily. If they had certain units they could use that by transferring. Anyway, so that was some of the rationale behind our discussions about this, kind of where the agenda item ended up.
I can't see that this is going to come up that frequently.
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah, it's not like it happens all. I don't even. I mean, possibly if the new fire station has more, let's say, toilets or floor drains than what they had previously, maybe they have to transfer some of them to the new fire station.
Yeah, I don't see much there. There's maybe a few going to a D Street facility that the city's working on right now. That have some sewer unit needs there, I would expect. They've already paid for these, and I think just as part of our efforts to streamline operations between the district and the city, just a piece of that.
Yeah, and actually that's another point that I haven't thought about much is there's been a dramatic turnaround in the past few years with the relationship between the city and the district. It wasn't always as friendly as it is now, and I think that they've gone out of their way to be nicer to us, and I think this is just one more step that we could show a little back in their direction.
It will be considered back on the books and stuff.
And put money on that cause money going out.
And another note is they did bring up to us about the possibility of transferring water capacity from one parcel to another. This is something that we've never done in the past. It could be a bit more complicated, which may require like an application type process.
In other words, if they want to upsize the line to the new parcel, they can create a capacity.
Yeah, if they have capacity on one lot,
And they have no-
they want to move that.
A brand new
lot.
service. Yeah.
It's
Like a station or two, I think they have a 6-inch connection there. That really could be something.
And they're actually probably gonna go that down quite a bit to save us some money as part of that memo that we wrote years ago that has been ignored subsequently for every year. And which, by the way, they're sure the staff is working on it, just they had their hands full.
I didn't know what kind of thoughts you might have on transferring water capacity from one parcel to another. I mean, staff could look into that a little bit more. We talked a little bit about it at lunch. And Shannon, if you want to speak to what you talked about.
Yeah, I haven't spent a bunch of time thinking about this, but my initial thought after our conversation at lunch is I would recommend that we approach these on a case-by-case basis for an entity that wants to come in and do this. And the example that came to my mind was, so they want to close down the rec center, build a new rec center someplace else, and that may be fine if it's on, say, that same area where the rec center is now. If they want to move it closer to Highway 50, and it would be fine potentially to take that service and move it over to the other parcel because it's really served out of the same zone off the same pipelines. If they were giving up the service at the old rec center, there's really no impact on the system. But if you were to take that and move it over to, say, a 6-inch service over to other locations in our system where we have 2-inch mains that are already overutilized or oversubscribed, it could be really disastrous to the system, and we wouldn't have the capacity to serve them with our system in that area. And so it makes more sense to me, given the way our system is developed, particularly on the water side, that we look at those on a case-by-case basis, and that my recommendation would be that we tell the city that if they want to do something like that, we would maybe open to considering it on a case-by-case basis. Tell us what you have planned, and then we would consider it. But that would be my opinion.
I actually agree with that, and I probably wouldn't even bring it up with them, let them bring it up with us.
Well, they've asked.
Oh, they've already asked me that one. Well, what do they have in mind on water capacity? Because I don't see that applies to any particular case. Or are they just trying to get it on the books for the?
They have asked for this in the past several times, like they have a development. So we've got 4-inch capacity over here that we're not using, we want to move it over there. The admin code forbids us to do that.
For the reasons Sharon talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
Would we have to offer this up to every public agency that we want, based on what we just discussed?
Yes. You're like, kind of like Gary said.
CPR.
I'm sorry?
CPRPA.
Yes. Not that they have, not that the RPA has any sewer units in excess, so transferring for them, so. TRPA doesn't have any sewer units in water capacity in excess, so.
So they pay like everybody
They
else.
pay like everybody else.
Okay, so you just need direction at this point?
I just need direction if you want to bring back something back. Probably at the next board meeting, I can bring something back to allow sewer units to be transferred from parcel to parcel for public agencies. That a water capacity could be determined on a case-to-case basis through an application process.
I like that. I think we should do it unless one of you folks has objections. Okay?
Thanks.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, I just want to add, if I could, I mean, we met on this like 2 weeks ago, and just want to thank Paul, Tim, and Gary for putting a solution together.
Yeah, we got right on
Yeah.
this. And I think they have a comment from the audience. Okay, no one expects this.
Mr. Wayne Wallace is speaking on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, so any personal humiliations you might wish to make, it's fine to remember you're also a senior person from the Chamber. Honorable President, board members, I'm here today to speak in favor of your considering changing the ordinance, and several reasons. One is it's consistent with what you're trying to do with affordable housing, and that's to allow the transfer of units. So it's already, as Nick pointed out, it's already, or Mr. Exline, excuse me. He pointed out that it needs. That's right, not a member of Congress yet. As he pointed out that it should be universal, well, it sort of is already because of the ordinance where we allow people to transfer sewer units for affordable housing. It's my understanding, based on the report that just came out by the Prosperity Center, that we're 3,200 housing units behind. The city is taking that very seriously because they're having a hard time getting employees to stay, as we probably are too, or even find a place here. That they intend to do some things with affordable housing. And they also, I believe, still have sewer units that we pointed out to them that are going to come off the Whole Foods property once they know how many they need. So it's also consistent with our efforts to fight fire, because in order to get the fire station number 2 open, they have considerable expenses. It's also consistent with us not wanting to waste money in government by government agencies placing obstacles in front of each other and charging each other money that's really not our money. It's not government money, it's taxpayer money. So with all those things considered, I would hope that you would consider moving this forward as some sort of ordinance. And that way when I get home, the door won't be locked. You can the candle soup on the door, you're on your own. So, but I think it's consistent with what you're trying to do, and that's be good neighbors. And it's always good to say, okay, what are the unintended consequences of this? And are we opening some sort of door? But the last thing, I think you pointed it out, they've already paid for these. So it's a matter of getting them back into use so the district can get the quarterly charges. So it's nice to see you all. I'm also a substitute teacher, so I thought, you know, I could maybe be a substitute board member.
I suggested if we sat there, half the staff wouldn't notice the difference.
And I can get extra sleep like I used to.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Okay, I think we are on payment of claims.
I will move approval of payment of claims in the amount of $1,762,908.04.
One second.
Okay, unanimous. Thank you all. Standing ad-hoc committee reports. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. You did have something, I think.
You threw it in at the last minute.
On the paperwork, on it. No wonder, I don't have any paperwork
It's
on it.
in the after action state, in your binders.
Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you're doing?
Chris Stanley, Manager of Field Operations. Tahoe Sewer Pump Station pump replacement. The last couple of board meetings, we've updated you on the issues we were facing out there. And after doing some research and talking with the crew members, here today to ask for an exception to bidding. And the reason why is we've been talking, and you guys all know from us coming up here talking to you that we had issues getting pumps and parts and things like that. So taking a look at Tahoe Sewer Station, that one takes in 19 stations, all fall and leaf, forestry, all those. We have rags and grease problems out there at times, or quite a few times. And what we've come up with is we would like to have an exception to bidding so we can purchase a Vaughn chopper pump, 40 horse. And we've had a lot of good luck with Vaughns. They chop up rags, those flushable wipes, grease, all those types of things. And there's only one dealer on the West Coast for them. So going out to bid for a Vaughn pump would just be a waste of time since there's only one dealer on the West Coast. But the Vaughn pump is a superior pump compared to most. It is a chopper pump, which is a great advantage for us. So we're here today to ask for an exception to bidding.
It all makes sense, especially kind of with the information you provided in previous board meetings. Just curious, what's the lead time to get this order installed?
We'll know more Monday, but you can count on every bit of 8 weeks plus. Yeah, getting the pumps themselves takes time because they just don't have them on the shelf like we've talked about before. But with the Vaughns, we have some in the system already, and we want to continue using the Vaughns. The part turnaround, if it blew up today, 9 times out of 10, we'd have the parts within a week, week and a half. Where a lot of these other pumps, we don't see them for a couple weeks to 4 weeks. So that's another advantage for us, standardizing or going to a pump like this. Tahoe Sewer Station is down by the lake. We put a lot of thought and time into it to make sure we do the right thing, because you lose a pump out there on a real rainy week or high flows, we could spill out there because one pump can't keep up. So, like I said, we took a lot of time and a lot of research to make sure we spend the money wisely, and we've come up with the Vaughn chopper pump, and I think that would be a good investment for the district.
What was the schedule for replacement in the tanker pump account?
I don't know if that was in it. I don't believe it was in there. And if I remember right, that pump was.
This is included under a regular item you have for things like this, right, Paul? In other words, it wasn't on the master plan or anything like that.
I don't believe it was part of the actual CIP.
Yeah.
But within the pumps department, in their capital expenditure budgets, they always have dollars set aside for pump replacements.
But those are often, they're planned pumps, they're not named in the budget, but they're ones that they are planning to replace. This was not one that was planned at all.
If I remember correctly, I believe that pump was still from the 1968, 69.
It was original installation.
Yeah, so we've more than got our money out of it.
And unfortunately, this is representative of a lot of these smaller pump stations that we have. And This actually is in better shape than a lot of those pump stations because this is actually a concrete dry well and wet well. Unfortunately, we have numerous steel, they're canned pump stations, they're steel dry wells and wet wells, and we're seeing a lot of deterioration in those stations. It's something we'll be talking about in the CIP process as we go forward. But just one individual pump replacement, I think this is a great approach. It's the right move for this station.
But even a pump station line item, we expect that's going to be going in next round. But yes, which detail yet for the fiscal year 21 budget, this line item for pump station replacement will probably grow based on, yes, compared to previous years, yes, for these types of reasons, yes.
We're going to be, unfortunately, we're going to be purchasing a lot of pumps unexpectedly. We can plan out as much as we want, but there's a lot of stations out there with 1969 pumps in them. So we're doing the best we can to try to anticipate what we can replace before they break, but I can't sit up here and guarantee you that's going to work all out with the age of our system and what's going on out there.
I'm supportive as well of getting the model you want as well, and making sure it aligns with all the other pumps we're in for the reasons you cited. But just out of curiosity, what will be kind of a comparable price for another pump product?
Well, the chopper pump is kind of unique. I did a little research before the board meeting, and I found some other pumps that were name brands I'd never even heard of, and they're from all over, the world. And there was one, I apologize for not remembering the name, but it was right around 22, 23. The 3 or 4 different pumps that I did look at, they don't claim to be chopper pumps, but they claim to be a non-clogging pump. They were all within $3,000 to $4,000 of each other.
And as we've experienced with Vaughn products in the past, their supply chain is really resilient. And so when we want to get parts, we can get parts from them, which is one of the big problems we've had with Flight and other pump manufacturers.
Yeah, what I'm afraid of and what we want to try to do in the future is I don't want to get too many different pumps in our system, because then you have to get parts for all those different ones. And it was a nightmare when I was just a supervisor in the water department. And then you also run across a situation where, they have to go to Europe or something to get the parts, and hopefully they have them. If they don't, that's where that 3-week, 4-week lead time comes in. So there's a lot of different scenarios where you could save $3,000 or $4,000, $5,000, but in the long run, when it comes to getting parts for the pump, the quality of the pumps that we're seeing nowadays aren't as good as they were in the 60s. So that's pretty much one of the reasons how we based it on the volume.
I think you got to get the product you're comfortable with and aligns with the direction we're going within the.
Yes, sir. That's what I would think.
Just kind of out of curiosity, because not actually entirely familiar with that pump purchasing.
I'm not an expert on it either. That's why I went into a little research before the board meeting, because I had a feeling I might be asked. There are non-clogging pumps out there, but like I said, they're Europe and all these different places. I've never even heard of the names of them. I would kind of feel a little guilty spending $23,000 to try to save $2,000 or $3,000 on a pump that I'm not familiar with and don't know anything about the parts availability. How long is this pump going to last compared to a common pump that we're used to? Things like that.
And can it cost you more faster?
That's what we're thinking. Yes.
You said the quality is not as good as the older pumps.
No, look at the pump we have out there, that 40 horse from 1969.
So does that mean we can't expect pumps to last as long as we would like? We're going to have...
Everything I've heard, I've actually had salesmen tell me that they don't make them to last that long because it's like anything else, like your household stove, refrigerator. Remember, you used to buy a refrigerator years ago in the 70s and it'd last 20, 30 years. Some of these salesmen are telling us that they're not building things to last that long anymore.
Planned obsolescence.
Yeah, and from what we've seen, a lot of these pumps aren't lasting like they should, or what we're used to back in the 70s.
We're not using the same steel formulas,
No.
right? They're not as hard, and they're wearing faster, and they're also, but modern pumps are also built with higher tolerances, and so those tolerances affect their efficiencies, and that's what allows them to get higher, more efficient pumping capacities, but you have that tolerance, and when that tolerance wears down with lower quality steel, you lose the operation of those warehouses.
Okay,
If there's no more questions.
just to read here.
Staff is asking for the board to approve special circumstance as the exception to bidding procedures as outlined in the purchasing policy for sole source purchase of bond chopper pump, and 2, authorize the purchase of a 40 horsepower bond chopper pump in the approximate amount of $26,933.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, now I think I can move on to, stating the ad-hoc committee report. I don't have anything, anybody else have anything on, okay, how about a board member report? Jerry?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, kind of as we move forward with the solar assessment process that's ongoing, one of the things that's come up several times was, kind of the permitting process, specifically for the TRPA. I just wanted to mention, I had a meeting actually with TRPA staff, Joanne Marquetta, the director, and John Hester, last week. And we were talking about many different things, but one of the items I brought up was solar, not just for STPD, but Basin wide. They use the STPD site as an example of, kind of regulatory considerations. And both John and Joanne confirmed that TRPA would not be a regulatory roadblock for the installation of solar, and that they would issue a TRPA policy position stating that. And I just wanted to mention that just so that we can kind of put that behind us in regards to kind of solar as it relates to TRPA permitting.
Is that a change they'll need to make to their code, or does that exist?
Well, there's no real, the problem with the TRPA code.
Probably would address it.
It's not addressed in the
I guess
code.
they technically count as coverage for ground mount solar panels, that was ground mount.
Coverage was one of those, coverage was a big issue, but it's one of those things, if you go through the TRPA planning documents, you know how it is, they have lots of documents that technically aren't really used anymore, but are still on the books and you could, or still should be considered in projects. And so that's why they came up with the policy position. Instead of looking through every old document and trying to find things that may or may not be an issue, just say, not an issue regardless of what the old plans say, and you move forward. So I took that as a good sign. Again, just wanted to have that conversation so that way, as we move forward, we would have that addressed or at least considered.
Yeah, great timing. Thank you for heading that up.
Jim, you have anything?
Just a quick one, I won't be at the next meeting, I'll be attending the Aqua Conference in Southern California. Shannon and I will be down there representing the district.
Okay. Along the lines of conferences, I almost every year go down to CASA in January. And I won't be able to make it this year, so it's wide open and somebody else wants to jump on it. And Shannon and John and I are still talking about Washington DC as far as if a board member is going to go this year or not. Shannon's planning on going. I understand from you, Nick, you don't have the time allocated for it. And Jim, you don't, you'd like to take a year off, if I understand right. So, oh, you're a maybe now. Okay.
Shannon was just like, where we before.
Well, I will let you, I'll talk to John and Shannon about it, Steve, let you know my availability if that happens. That's my only thing, so we're good. Okay, I guess that moves us to the Eldorado County Water Agency.
And the meeting was canceled.
Okay, Kelly, I was going to sleep over that one.
It's kind of like open that email. And then I think the one in December usually gets canceled too, but.
I've heard. So.
But no, I'm just
Yeah.
speculating on that.
That's really
Maybe they'll have it since they canceled.
Cool, so I guess I'll get to you, John.
Okay, thank you. Have a few things today, starting with a staffing update. And I think we're finally catching up on our staffing vacancies, trying to do things with Nancy, and she's very, expedite some of our hiring processes. So that's been working out a lot better. I have 3 updates on staffing. At the last meeting, I mentioned that we selected 2 pump station operators. One was in-house, Jason Paul, who's with Underground Repair Sewer, and the other was from the outside, just completed the pre-employment process. So the other person is Steve Callis. He's an experienced mechanic and welder coming to us from South Tahoe Refuse. So that'll be a great addition to pumps. So next, Underground Repair Sewer with Jason Paul going to pumps. We are now advertising for his replacement, and that advertising will close on the 12th, and we're expecting interviews in early January. And then in engineering, we're currently advertising for that full-time project engineer. A little concerned about the tight labor market these days and the time of year, but we'll see what kind of response we get on this first round that closes on the 19th.
Time of year might be the latest hurdle.
Yeah, so we'll take a first look. We might extend that period and maybe try some different ways for outreach for folks.
If you advertise it, we put it on the chair list.
Throw in the trouble, throw in a season pass.
So the next item is climate change adaptation planning. Lots going on regionally at the city and at the district. And I wanted to let the board know about these climate change planning processes, and that with your approval, the district will remain engaged in these current and ongoing efforts. So first and foremost, I would say at this point, the district has been collaborating with the CTC, TRPA, and many others in a major regional effort. It's called the Lake Tahoe Basin Climate Change Adaptation Action Plan. And there's a website if you'd like more information. This is like a 2.5-year, $1 million planning effort being led by the CTC. So we're absolutely part of that. There have been 3 workshops so far this year. We hosted one of those here. And the schedule is for this plan to be completed in 2020. So we'll keep you informed on that progress. Next up, I want to mention the city will soon be initiating a significant planning effort next month. The city's Climate Action Plan kickoff meeting will be Wednesday, December 11th at 6 p.m. So we'll be attending, collaborating, coordinating our own planning efforts with the city. And Nick, I see you already signed up, so we're looking forward to that. Finally, I want to talk about our work at the district. We are nearing completion of a climate adaptation planning document for the capital improvement program. This is really a high-level plan, a 3-month effort, an introductory effort that was approved by the board in July and needed as part of our SRF loan application, which is due next month. So this is actually the district's first deliverable on climate change adaptation planning. And just to be clear, this plan is not a comprehensive climate action plan or policy for the district. It does not really include detailed goals, projects, schedules, costs, or commitments. It looks at climate change risks specific to district operations and provides context for CFD planning as needed for the SRF process. So with board direction, I expect a more detailed approach to our climate change adaptation planning processes in the coming year. And I expect this will include substantial board interaction, including workshops, engagement with other stakeholders, and all in coordination with the other efforts underway at the CBC and the city and elsewhere. So back to our current project at the district, we're now incorporating comments on the draft. The draft was first made available to Operations Committee just last week. We're on a very short time frame because of the SRF schedule. The final will be complete next Wednesday, and I'll make it available to the board at that time. Then Lynn will be back here on December 5th with more detail and asking the board to approve this planning document, again, which is needed for our SRF submittal. So next item, California Tahoe Alliance. Of course, we're actively working at both the state and federal levels to advocate for fire suppression infrastructure funding. On the state level in California, we're doing this through the California Tahoe Alliance, the CTA. So at the Alliance, we're focusing our advocacy efforts in 3 main areas: natural resources, infrastructure, and sustainable recreation. So We kind of broke into 3 working groups, and we're part of the infrastructure group. So we've gotten together mostly with Tahoe City and North Tahoe to define the issues, identify needs, and develop a priority project listing. And I'm expecting to bring this, I think, to the board in the next month or 2. We're now working with our lobbyists in Sacramento through the Alliance. It's Platinum, the name of that group is Platinum Partners. They'll help us connect with our state representatives and schedule visits in January and February of next year for the new legislative session. And so we're coordinating the CTA work with our federal lobbyists, Eric Saperstein and David French. They will actually be here in January, part to work with the CTA on these efforts. And some good news from DC, actually. They've been working with Senator Harris's office to specifically include water infrastructure in the definition of critical infrastructure in the wildfire bill that she just introduced. And so Representative Jared Huffman also introduced companion legislation in the House. And I also want to mention that McClintock has a wildfire forest management bill moving forward. So lots happening in DC. We appreciate the work of Eric and David to connect us with Harris and the other offices, especially I think we see Company Feinstein fading away, if you will, and Harris being our dominant force in DC. So we appreciate their work. I think this has been a great connection. The district was actually quoted in the press release for for the Harris press release that was sent out last week. I think we'll forward this to the board so they can take a look. Really appreciate the work Shelley and Shannon have put into this to make that happen. And that is my report for today. Jim?
You need more information on McClintock's proposal, or can you forward that?
We'll get that to you. I think Shannon separately on that. For sure.
That's huge for getting that included. That's phenomenal for that.
Yeah, and that is solely due to our work and David and Eric back in DC. Nobody else is asking for this to happen. It's the efforts that we're advocating for that are making that happen. And so, really impressive for David and Eric to develop this relationship with Harris's staff. Obviously, no one's developing relationships with Harris right now, but with her staff, so that we can get this language in that bill is really pretty remarkable. I think John and I were talking about this. Part of the goal for this effort is that every time we're able to get this kind of language, support or specific language in bills to support fire suppression infrastructure for water agencies in these bills, the more that becomes the standard, and eventually we won't have to ask for it every time on every single fire bill. They'll look at the last one and they'll just start including that stuff. And so hopefully we continue to develop that momentum and it gets funded in the future.
But some bills, if they don't get passed at a certain point this year, they'll be bringing back next year and we'll be in it.
Yeah.
David especially has a good relationship with the staff person at Hardy Harris's office.
With Ike Irby. Yeah. And that this was picked up by Huffman as well. That's a really good sign that some of the stuff can have traction. Often what happens is these bills, this comes from Harris, Feinstein put something out. What was your forestry guy's name? I'm drawing a blank on it. Jim, the forestry guy that you met with when the Western Caucus was here. Westerman, yeah. So Westerman, all those bills ultimately kind of get consolidated into one big thing as part of some other big thing. And if our language is in each one of those bills, it all gets rolled in, and we don't have to fight about it when it all gets rolled into the main bill. So that's why it's so important. Even though Harris's bill is not going to become law, that's not very, very, very unlikely that that's going to happen. But the more our language is out there, the more it gets rolled into these other things, and it has a big chance of getting adopted.
She may get combined in some other bill too.
Yeah.
And Feinstein and Gaines from Montana are putting a bill together, so that may be able to get into that.
Exactly, and that's our expectation, is to hopefully have our language in that bill And the McClintock bill is more focused on forest management, on expanding the categorical exclusion. So he was effective at getting categorical exclusions for forestry management projects expanded in the Tahoe Basin to 10,000 acres, and he's trying to take that worldwide or nationwide now to allow other forestry projects to be able to take advantage of that larger categorical exclusion to make forestry projects or forest thinning projects more efficient.
There's so much projects in the past that had to be smaller and they're not that economical.
I think the current limit's like 3,000
Yeah.
acres, which the forestry guys say, you know, that's just not a fundable project. It's too small for a lot of forestry projects. Anyway.
Oh, very good. I see staff attorney reports is blank, that very hard.
Well, since you.
When you pull my leg, you got something.
Just quick.
If he's not listening, he can't talk.
That's right.
Since Evil's not here right now,
You got a PowerPoint.
yes. He's working on it right now. Evil's having a stakeholder advisory group meeting tomorrow, dealing with the groundwater management plan. If you recall, that groundwater management plan was approved as an alternative under Sigma. So now the process is to get the SAG re-engaged with that, and part of the focus is to look at, now that it's been approved as the alternative, what needs to be done to it. We haven't, since 2015, we haven't been able to do anything to it, and DWR has, in their approval, made some recommended changes. They're not mandatory, so he will be presenting those. And the other thing is he's going to be asking SAG members, you know, are there other things, is there new information, other things that should be considered and rolled into this update. So I anticipate that sometime after this meeting, Evo will come to you to give you an update, kind of where things are in this process of updating the groundwater management plan, which we'll eventually go through basically the same process as when we adopted the 2014 groundwater management plan. This amendment will go through that same public process. And in this instance, running parallel with that, the county water agency will do the same. If you remember, where the district is the sustainable groundwater agency within the district's boundaries, the county is in these fringe areas that are within the basin but not within the district's boundaries. So those processes will run parallel with each other. And it's probably, I don't think it's going to happen quickly, but it's going to take a little time to work through this. And Evo working with the SAG. So I'm sure he'll want to give you an update here in the next month or so.
And on that topic, I was speaking with Evo earlier today. He had drafted up changes, modifications to the plan, submitted it to Gary and his staff to review, and he was incredibly impressed with what he got back from you guys. That he was really pleased with the changes and the improvements that you guys made to those documents. So it pains me to give kudos to an attorney, but we just want to say thank you. I think you guys are doing a great job for us on that front.
Oh, I thought I was the guy. All right, thank you, Gary. All sarcasm was good. All right, if that's it, you guys can see the past and future meetings. We've got a couple of closed session items to deal with, so we'll give everybody a couple minutes to move into closed session. Closed session is nothing to report. Meeting adjourned.